Human reaches a burning barricade to save alien girl, and the flames twist aside only for human. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Commander Jacob Matthews stood at rigid attention in the gleaming reception hall of the Crimson Palace, headquarters of the Tan Dominion on Earth. His muscular frame glistened with a light sheen of sweat from the mandatory physical assessment he had just completed. Black trousers hugged his hips, secured by a polished black belt. He ran a hand through his slicked-back light blonde hair, feeling the stubble on his jaw. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, and the duty ahead was as monumental as the building itself. The Tan Dominion, a massive empire spanning 17 star systems, had arrived on Earth. And he, Jacob Matthews, had been selected to protect their most valuable asset. Commander Matthews, a Tan official addressed him, her bright red skin contrasting with her ornate silver uniform. Your military record is exceptional. 3 tours in the Orion conflict. Decorated twice for valor. And your psychological profile indicates unwavering loyalty. Jacob maintained his stoic expression. I serve where I'm needed. Indeed, she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And now you're needed in a rather unique capacity. She slid a data tablet across the obsidian table. You've been selected as personal bodyguard to Queen Nisara of the Tan Dominion during her extended diplomatic mission on Earth. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly. The Tan Queen, ruler of a star empire, coming to Earth? The implications were enormous. I'm honored, but the position is non-negotiable, Commander, the official cut him off, her tone final. The Human-Tan alliance is still fragile. Having a human protector sends a powerful message of trust. Jacob scanned the tablet in front of him. The assignment details were sparse, but the compensation was astronomical. After his dishonorable discharge from Earth Defense Force, a political move after he had exposed corruption in the upper ranks, this opportunity seemed too good to be true. When do I begin? Immediately. The Queen's transport arrives tomorrow. You'll be briefed on protocol tonight. The official stood, and Jacob nodded. The Queen's arrival marked the beginning of a mission that would alter the course of history, and he was about to be at the center of it all. The following morning, Jacob stood on the landing pad atop the Crimson Palace, dressed in his new formal uniform, tailored black suit with subtle crimson accents marking him as royal security. The sleek tan vessel descended through the clouds, its silver hull catching the morning sunlight. The ramp extended with a soft hiss. He straightened his posture, preparing for the moment that would define his mission. First came a contingent of Tan guards, their red skin and silver armor creating a living curtain. Then, she appeared. Queen Nisara stood tall and regal, her bright red skin luminous against her elaborate silver and black bodysuit adorned with gold emblems of office. Her long silvery hair cascaded down her back, and her striking blue eyes surveyed the reception party with cool assessment. Even from a distance, Jacob could feel the weight of her authority. The Queen barely acknowledged the assembled dignitaries before disappearing into the palace with her entourage, leaving Jacob standing awkwardly on the platform. Commander Wood, he turned to find another Tan woman approaching him. For a moment, he thought the Queen had returned, but subtle differences became apparent. Though physically identical, same bright red skin, silvery hair, and blue eyes, this woman wore a simpler version of the royal attire. Her expression was warmer, more approachable. I'm Lara, she said, extending a slender hand in the human custom of greeting. The Queen's proxy. I understand you'll be my primary security detail. Jacob took her hand, noting the strength in her grip. Commander Jacob Matthews, at your service. The Queen is resting after the journey. She has a private meeting with world leaders tomorrow. Today, however, I'm scheduled to tour your city's cultural district as a goodwill gesture. I hope you don't mind starting work immediately. There was something in her tone, a hint of resignation, that caught Jacob's attention. This wasn't just a clone following orders. This was a person with her own thoughts and feelings. Not at all, Jacob replied, offering his arm in a formal escort position. It would be my pleasure to show you Earth's finest cultural achievements. Lara's eyes widened slightly at the gesture before she placed her hand on his arm. How gallant, she said. The briefing said humans were an interesting species, but they didn't mention charming. As they walked toward the waiting transport, Jacob felt the eyes of the TAN officials on them. He had been briefed on maintaining professional distance, but something about Lara's almost imperceptible sigh of relief at being treated as a person rather than an object made him want to show her more than just Earth's museums. Just doing my job, he said with a small smile. Though I suspect guarding you will be far more pleasant than my previous assignments. Lara laughed, a melodic sound that seemed to surprise even her. I think this arrangement might work out after all. The National Gallery's grand atrium soared above them, sunlight streaming through glass panels to illuminate centuries of humanity's artistic achievements. Jacob watched Lara as she moved from exhibit to exhibit, her reactions far more captivating than the masterpieces surrounding them. The following days passed in a blur of meetings, diplomatic functions, and tours across Earth's most notable cultural districts. Jacob Matthews kept a professional distance from Lara, but something about their interactions lingered in the air. As they moved from one exhibit to another, he couldn't help but notice the way Lara looked at him, her blue eyes filled with curiosity and something deeper, almost hidden. She was, after all, a proxy for the Queen of the Tan Dominion, but Jacob couldn't ignore the quiet connection forming between them. They spent the next few days traveling between art galleries and cultural landmarks, with Lara's thoughtful remarks about the artworks and her keen interest in human history providing an intriguing contrast to the more formal aspects of her role. In every discussion, she revealed more of herself, and Jacob couldn't help but feel drawn to her intelligence, her insight, and the subtle vulnerability that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting tour of a historical museum, they found themselves alone in the royal gardens behind the embassy. The garden was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of sunset. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Lara paused in front of a large fountain, its water sparkling in the fading light. It's beautiful. Here, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of something unspoken. Jacob nodded, his gaze lingering on the fountain, but his mind focused on her words. It is. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Lara turned to face him, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. What do you mean? She asked, her tone teasing but curious. Jacob hesitated for a moment before answering. I thought you'd be different. Cold, detached. But you're not. Lara's smile faded slightly, her expression turning thoughtful. I've had to learn how to be detached, to be a part of something greater than myself. But that doesn't mean I don't feel things. Things I'm not supposed to. Jacob could hear the unspoken emotion in her words. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. You don't have to be just a proxy, you know. You're your own person. She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Jacob saw something shift in her eyes. It was as though she was letting down a wall she had kept up for years. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Ready for what? Jacob asked, his voice low. To be more than just an extension of the Queen. To make my own choices, to be my own person. Her words hung in the air, a delicate balance of hope and uncertainty. Jacob's heart clenched at the vulnerability in her voice. He stepped closer still, his hand instinctively reaching out to her. You don't have to do it alone, he said gently, his voice filled with quiet reassurance. Lara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can, but I'd like to try. Jacob didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there, the tension between them palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. It was as if the entire universe had paused, giving them this fleeting moment to acknowledge the feelings that had slowly but surely been growing between them. "We'll figure it out," Jacob said softly, his voice steady. "Together." Lara nodded, a faint but genuine smile forming on her lips. "Together," she repeated, the word feeling like a promise. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood side by side in the garden, the world around them continuing its endless motion, but for a brief moment, it felt as though time had stopped. And in that stillness, something important had shifted between them, something that neither of them could ignore. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with political complexities, personal challenges, and the ever-present duty that Lara carried. But for the first time, it felt like they were no longer just a bodyguard and a royal proxy. They were two individuals, standing together, ready to face whatever came next. The following weeks were filled with diplomatic meetings, public events, and quiet moments that allowed Jacob and Lara to grow closer. As they spent more time together, the bond between them deepened. Lara, despite her royal duties and the complex web of politics surrounding her, began to reveal more of herself to Jacob. She shared stories of her home world, the struggles of living as a proxy for the Queen, and the weight of the responsibilities that had been thrust upon her. Jacob listened intently, his own life experience giving him a unique perspective on her situation. He understood the burden of duty, the feeling of being trapped in a role that wasn't entirely your own. But what struck him the most was how Lara, despite everything, still retained a spark of individuality. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of diplomatic functions, Jacob found himself alone in the garden again. The soft glow of the moonlight reflected off the shimmering water of the fountain, creating a serene atmosphere. He had been thinking about their last conversation, about how Lara had confessed her doubts about her own identity. He had sensed her vulnerability then, a side of her that she rarely allowed others to see. Just as he was lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Lara approaching, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. "Jacob," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being more than just a proxy." Jacob smiled slightly, his heart warming at the sight of her. "And," he asked, his voice calm. Lara hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, her eyes meeting his. I think I'm ready to try," she said quietly. "To be myself. To not just be defined by my role as the Queen's proxy." Jacob's smile grew wider, though he kept his voice steady. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be more than what others expect of you." Lara looked down for a moment, then back up at him, her expression serious. "But I can't do it alone, Jacob. I need your help. I need someone who sees me for who I am, not just who I'm supposed to be." The vulnerability in her words struck him deeply. He had never imagined that a woman as strong as Lara, who carried the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders, would ever feel this uncertain. Without thinking, he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "You're not alone, Lara. I'm here for you, always." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, there was no one else in the world but the two of them, standing together in the quiet garden. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." They stood there for a while, their hands still intertwined, the weight of their shared moment settling around them. The rest of the world, with all its complexities and expectations, felt distant, as if it didn't matter. In that moment, it was just the two of them, finding comfort in each other's presence. Eventually, Lara broke the silence, her voice steady but filled with a new sense of determination. "We'll face everything together, won't we?" Jacob nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "Together," he said, his voice resolute. And with that simple word, the future felt just a little bit less daunting. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, whether it was navigating the political landscape of the Tan Dominion or finding their own paths in a world that often tried to define them. But in that moment, they knew that they were no longer bound by their roles. They were free to be themselves, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the relationship between Jacob and Lara continued to evolve. They had found a rhythm, navigating the complexities of their respective roles while still finding time to connect on a personal level. Lara's transformation from a mere proxy to someone embracing her own identity was evident in the way she carried herself now. She was more confident, more relaxed in her interactions with Jacob, and more open about her thoughts and feelings. Jacob, for his part, had become her most trusted companion, someone she could rely on not just as her bodyguard, but as a true friend. One evening, after a long day of meetings and diplomatic discussions, Lara invited Jacob to join her for dinner in the royal garden. It was a quiet evening, with only the soft rustling of the leaves in the gentle breeze filling the air. The garden was lit by soft, glowing lanterns that gave the whole scene an ethereal quality, casting long shadows on the stone pathways. As they sat down at the stone table, Lara smiled at Jacob, her expression soft and contemplative. "I've been thinking about something," she began, her voice quiet but steady. Jacob looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" he asked. Lara paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "About my role in all of this. About what I really want, not just what's expected of me." Jacob listened intently, his attention fully on her. He knew how much she had been struggling with the weight of her responsibilities, and he could sense that this conversation was important. "I want to be more than just a figurehead," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I want to make a real difference, not just follow orders and live in the shadow of someone else's expectations. But I don't know how to begin." Jacob placed his hand on the table, his fingers brushing against hers in a silent gesture of support. "You're already doing it," he said gently. "You're starting to make decisions for yourself. That's where it all begins." Lara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but finding none. She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I don't know what the future holds, Jacob," she said quietly. "But I know I want you by my side, whatever happens." Jacob felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had known for some time now that his feelings for Lara went beyond duty. But hearing her speak so honestly, so vulnerably, made everything feel more real. "I'll be here," he promised. "Always." They sat in companionable silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in that moment. It was a rare moment of peace in a world that was often filled with chaos and uncertainty. As the evening drew to a close, Lara stood up, her hand still resting lightly on Jacob's. "Come on," she said, her tone lighter now. "Let's take a walk. I want to show you something." Jacob followed her through the garden, their footsteps soft on the stone paths. She led him to a small, secluded area near the edge of the garden where a large, ancient tree stood. The tree's thick branches stretched out above them, providing a canopy of leaves that swayed gently in the evening breeze. "This is where I come to think," Lara said, her voice quieter now. "It's the one place I can go where I don't have to be anyone else. Just me." Jacob nodded, understanding the need for solitude, especially for someone like Lara, who was constantly surrounded by people and expectations. He stepped closer to her, feeling the weight of the moment settling around them. "I think you're doing just fine," he said softly. Lara turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was a depth in them now, a strength that hadn't been there before. "Thank you, Jacob," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything." Jacob smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm just glad I can be here for you." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the garden and the ancient tree, Jacob realized that they had both changed. They had both found something in each other, something that went beyond duty or expectation. It was something real, something that could withstand the challenges that lay ahead. And whatever the future held, Jacob knew that they would face it together. The days following their quiet walk through the garden passed in a haze of calm, the kind of peace that Jacob had rarely known in his life. Lara seemed to be growing more comfortable with her role, no longer just a proxy for the queen, but a woman finding her own voice in the world. They continued their routine, spending time together after the diplomatic functions, walking through the city's cultural landmarks, sharing moments of laughter and thought. It felt as though the world outside could not touch them, cocooned in the safety of their growing connection. But even in moments of peace, the weight of their positions lingered. Jacob was still her protector, her bodyguard, though the boundaries between them had shifted. He was not just a guard anymore, he was someone she could trust, someone who had seen her at her most vulnerable. And in return, he trusted her in ways he had not trusted anyone in years. One evening, after another long day of meetings and public appearances, they found themselves back in the garden, the quiet of the evening falling over them. Lara had insisted they take a break from the usual routines. "Jacob," she began, her voice quiet, as they sat on a stone bench beneath the ancient tree. "There's something I need to talk to you about. Something that's been on my mind for a while." Jacob turned to her, his expression calm but attentive. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice steady. Lara paused for a moment, her eyes fixed on the branches above them, as if gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about my future," she continued. "About what happens after this mission. After all the duties and expectations are done." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had always known that this day would come, the day when they would have to face the reality of their situation. But hearing Lara speak so openly about it made the weight of it all feel more real. "What do you want, Lara?" he asked gently. She looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face for understanding. "I want to live a life that's mine," she said quietly. "I want to make choices that are mine to make. I want to be free." Jacob nodded, understanding more than she knew. He, too, had yearned for freedom, freedom from the weight of his past, from the constraints of duty and obligation. "You deserve that," he said softly, his voice firm with conviction. "You deserve to live for yourself, not just for others." Lara smiled at him, a small, wistful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But how do I do that, Jacob?" she asked. "How do I step away from everything that's been expected of me?" Jacob thought for a moment, then spoke with quiet confidence. "One step at a time," he said. "Start with the little things. What do you want to do today? What makes you happy, Lara?" She thought for a moment, then looked at him with a spark of determination in her eyes. "I want to learn more about Earth," she said. "I want to understand what it's like to be human, to live a life like yours. I've spent so long living in a world of rules and expectations. I want to know what it's like to choose for myself." Jacob smiled, his heart swelling with pride for her. "We can start with that," he said. "There's a whole world out there for you to discover." They stood up, and Lara took his arm, the warmth of her touch grounding him in the present. "Let's go then," she said, her voice light. "Let's start today." Jacob knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would walk it together, side by side, discovering the world and themselves along the way. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt a sense of hope for the future, a future where they could both find freedom, happiness, and the life they deserved. As the weeks continued to unfold, Jacob and Lara's bond grew deeper, shifting from a professional relationship into something more personal. The quiet moments they shared were becoming increasingly significant. Lara, once burdened by the expectations of her position, was finding her own way. Jacob had become more than just a bodyguard, he was her confidant, her anchor in a world that had often felt like it was closing in on her. Together, they explored the world, moving from city to city, learning about each other and the cultures that defined Earth. Lara found joy in the simplest things, watching children play in the park, tasting food she had never imagined, and even experiencing the beauty of a sunset without the weight of royal duties looming over her. She was finally free to just be herself. But as the days passed, the reality of their situation began to creep back into their lives. The looming political pressures of Lara's position were never far from the surface. Though she had begun to step away from her role as the Queen's proxy, she still carried the weight of that responsibility. One evening, after a long day of sightseeing in a bustling city, Lara sat on a bench, her gaze distant. Jacob noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. He had grown attuned to her moods, and he could see the burden she carried. Sitting beside her, he spoke gently, "You're quiet tonight. What's on your mind?" Lara took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," she said, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. "I've come so far, Jacob. I've started living for myself, but what happens when all of this normal life ends? What happens when I have to go back to being the Queen's proxy?" Jacob watched her carefully, his expression understanding. "You don't have to go back to that," he said, his voice steady. "You're not the same person who came here. You found your voice, your independence. And that's something no one can take away from you." Lara looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "It's not that simple, Jacob. There are people who expect things from me here, my people, my family. They want the Queen, not a woman who is trying to define herself outside of her role." Jacob reached out, placing a hand on hers, offering reassurance. "But Lara, you've already taken the hardest step. You're choosing your own path. And that's the most powerful thing you can do." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the city lights flickering in the distance. Lara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the connection they shared. "I just don't know if I can do it alone," she admitted quietly. Jacob looked at her, his expression soft but resolute. "You're not alone. I'm right here, and I'll be here for as long as you need me. We'll figure it out together." Lara met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path ahead was uncertain, but with Jacob by her side, she knew she wasn't facing it alone. The future would come with its challenges, but she was ready to face them, to find her own way, whatever that might be. As they sat there, their hands intertwined, the noise of the world around them faded. In this moment, it was just the two of them, and everything felt possible. Lara had taken the first step toward freedom, and with Jacob's unwavering support, she was ready to continue walking down that path. Together. The weeks that followed were a blend of calm reflection and looming challenges. Lara and Jacob had settled into a routine that balanced their personal connection with the duties they still had to face. Despite the growing sense of normalcy in their private moments, the pressures of Lara's position remained in the background. She had started to carve out her own identity, but the weight of her role as a representative of the Tan Dominion still hung heavily on her shoulders. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park on the outskirts of the city, Lara spoke about the growing tension she felt between her personal desires and the obligations placed upon her. "Jacob, I know you've been by my side through all of this, but I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing," she said, her voice carrying a quiet vulnerability. Jacob looked at her, the city lights reflecting off his calm expression. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone steady but filled with concern. "I've spent so much of my life being told what to do, what I should believe in, how I should act. Now that I've started to make my own choices, I feel like I'm constantly second-guessing myself. What if I'm making a mistake?" Lara continued, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jacob paused, taking a moment before speaking. "Lara, you've already done something many people can't even dream of, you've taken control of your life. There will always be doubt, but that's a part of growth. What matters is that you're learning to trust yourself." Lara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for some reassurance. "But how do I know I'm not just running away from my responsibilities?" she asked softly. Jacob reached for her hand, gently holding it as they continued walking. "You're not running away. You're figuring out who you are, outside of what others expect. That's not the same as running away. You're embracing what's true for you." Lara let out a quiet breath, the tension easing from her shoulders. "I want to believe that," she said, looking out at the city skyline. "I really do." "You will," Jacob assured her. "And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." The park was still, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Lara smiled softly, feeling the weight in her chest lift slightly. "I don't know what the future holds, Jacob, but I know I want you in it." Jacob's heart swelled at her words, and he squeezed her hand in response. "I'm not going anywhere, Lara. We're in this together." They walked side by side for a while longer, both lost in their own thoughts, but united in a shared sense of purpose. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel quite so overwhelming. Together, they were finding their way. The days ahead would bring challenges, but they would face them not as a bodyguard and a queen's proxy, but as two individuals, two equals, learning to build a life on their own terms. Weeks turned into months, and the world around Lara and Jacob continued to evolve. Their relationship, once defined by the rigid lines of duty and responsibility, had transformed into something deeper, something more real. Jacob had always been her protector, her bodyguard, but now he was her partner, someone who shared in her dreams, her doubts, and the weight of the future. Lara, for the first time in her life, felt truly free. Free from the chains of expectation, free to make her own decisions, and free to explore who she was outside of her royal identity. Yet, despite the peace she had found, the pressures of her position never fully disappeared. She still carried the weight of her people's hopes and the knowledge that, one day, she would have to return to the role that had been chosen for her. It was a difficult balancing act. One afternoon, after a particularly taxing meeting with the Tang Council, Lara found herself staring out over the city from the balcony of their apartment. Jacob had been busy preparing for their next diplomatic mission, but the tension in Lara's chest remained. He noticed her from across the room and stepped up behind her, his presence calm and steady as always. Thinking about the future again, he asked gently, his voice a soft anchor in the whirlwind of her thoughts. Lara didn't look at him right away, her eyes tracing the horizon. "How can I not?" she said quietly, her voice thick with unspoken worries. "I know I'm not meant to be just the Queen's proxy forever, but I feel like I don't know who I am without that role." Jacob stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You are so much more than that," he said, his voice firm with conviction. Lara finally turned to face him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "I want to believe that. I do. But sometimes, the weight of what I have to do next feels impossible to bear." Jacob's gaze softened as he took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the present moment. "You don't have to carry it all alone, Lara," he said quietly. "I'm here. Whatever comes, we face it together." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt, but found none. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing together in this quiet space, sharing an understanding that was deeper than words. "I'm not sure what comes next," Lara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know I don't want to face it without you." Jacob smiled gently, his thumb brushing across her hand in a slow, reassuring motion. "And you won't," he said softly. "We've both come this far, and we'll keep moving forward. One step at a time." Lara nodded, feeling the weight in her chest ease slightly. The uncertainty was still there, lingering like a shadow in the back of her mind, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone in carrying it. Together, they had found a way to move past the expectations, the duties, and the roles that had once defined them. They had built something real between them, something strong enough to weather the challenges ahead. "So," Jacob said after a pause, his voice light, "how about we take the rest of the day off? We could explore the city a bit more, just us, no meetings, no politics, just the two of us." Lara looked up at him, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time that day. "I think that sounds perfect," she said. And for that moment, with the world outside fading away, Lara finally felt a sense of peace, peace in knowing that no matter what the future held, she would face it with the one person who truly understood her. Together. As days turned to weeks, the city they had grown so fond of became a backdrop to a new chapter of their lives. Lara and Jacob, once defined by their respective roles in the larger scheme of the universe, now embraced a new sense of freedom. Every day felt like a discovery. The world was vast and full of endless possibilities, and for the first time in her life, Lara didn't feel burdened by her royal title. She had found peace, not in the absence of challenges, but in the strength to face them, knowing she had Jacob by her side. Their relationship had deepened in ways that neither of them had anticipated. What had begun as a simple connection, one forged out of necessity, had blossomed into something far more profound. Jacob, who had once seen his role as a protector above all else, now realized that his heart had grown in a way he hadn't expected. He had grown to love Lara, not just as the woman he was sworn to protect, but as a partner, a friend, and someone who had shown him a different kind of strength. The days spent exploring the city together became more than just a way to pass the time, they were a journey of their own. From the quiet coffee shops they visited to the bustling markets, every shared moment deepened their bond. The connection between them felt effortless, a rhythm they had found that neither expected but both cherished. One afternoon, after another long day of meetings and public appearances, Jacob and Lara found themselves on the rooftop of their apartment. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city below. They sat together, side by side, in comfortable silence, watching as the city lights began to flicker to life. Lara leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I never imagined it would be like this," she said softly, her voice quiet against the evening air. Jacob turned his head to look at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Like what?" he asked, his tone warm with affection. Lara looked out at the horizon, her eyes distant for a moment as she collected her thoughts. "Free," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet wonder. "For so long, I was trapped in a role, in a life that wasn't mine. I've always been the Queen's proxy, the future ruler, the one who had to meet everyone's expectations. But now, I get to choose. I get to live for myself. And it's more than I ever imagined." Jacob reached over and gently took her hand in his touch a silent promise. "You've earned it," he said quietly. "You've fought for your freedom, and now you get to live it. I'm proud of you, Lara." She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his face with a softness that was new. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Jacob felt his heart swell at her words, his fingers gently squeezing hers. "You've always had the strength, Lara. I'm just glad I got to be by your side when you found it." There was a long pause between them, the weight of their words settling into the space around them. And then, as the city below them continued its hum, Lara leaned in closer to Jacob, her voice low but full of conviction. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said. "I'm ready to live my life, on my terms. With you." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had known for some time now that this was more than just a shared journey, it was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. He pulled her closer, their foreheads gently touching. "And I'll be right here, every step of the way," he promised. "We'll face whatever comes, together." As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat there, hand in hand, knowing that the future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like a future they could face with hope and with each other. Together, they had found something real, something that neither the pressures of royalty nor the weight of the world could take away. It was theirs, and it was enough.